Book 6, Flight to the Wounded Falcon, Chapter 16. Discover anything thought-provoking? The large table in the eating room of the Brighter house had been filled to capacity while the Brighters were away at the memorial service. Judith had organized the rest of the Zenuses, neighbors, and the rectory to bring enough food to keep all three extended families fed for a few days. That's where the families began to slowly make their way after Peto's dedication of the grave. Eating had kind of been forgotten since dinner was missed yesterday. Breakfast was an afterthought that morning, and midday meal had been skipped. But now, after the little ones tossed the last of their flowers, and their parents quietly walked them back to the Brighters to feed them, the crowd around Perrin's grave began to dwindle. After half an hour, all that were left were Mari, Peto, Jatsi, and Shem. Ralph stood to the side, his tools in hand, hoping to get in a few more hours of work before sunset. Tomorrow he'd return to his regular job carving stone for a new rectory in the southwest of Salem, so the time that he could spend on the border would be limited to just the evenings. But it didn't seem right to continue working on the stone until Mugga was ready to leave. Mari noticed him standing nearby. "It looks wonderful already, Ralph. You should have his name finished by this evening, I imagine." "But there will be much more to put on it, Mugga. Plenty of stone. I hope you'll be happy with it." "How could I not be?" But she stared at the pile of dirt. "Mother," Jatsi said gently, "you really should eat something. Lilith said you missed breakfast. You look rather peaked." Mari was tempted to say, "What does it matter?" But she had already promised her father she would at least try. Instead, she nodded. "I will. I just need a few more minutes. Why don't you three go ahead? I promise I'll come to the house in a bit. I'd like a little time alone." Peto and Jatsi looked at Shem, who nodded to them. They reluctantly stood up, but Shem kneeled down in front of Mari. He took her hands into his and kissed them. "All of this will make sense someday, I promise. Oh, Mari, I just can't bear to see you so sad." Mari tried to smile, but wasn't sure what twist of muscles appeared on her face. "What would I do without you, Shem?" Then her smile became genuine as she remembered something. "Do you realize we never did tell him about the sedation we gave him during his trauma when he couldn't sleep in Edge? I actually planned to tell him about that one day." Shem managed a grin. "I think I just heard someone in the woods groaning in frustration and rubbing his forehead. He knows now." Mari looked up. "We had to, Perrin. We needed to sleep." She patted Shem's cheek. "Go get something to eat, and thank you for everything. You did a wonderful job today, as usual." Shem nodded, touched her cheek, then stood up. He put his arms around Peto and Jatsi and walked them back to the house. And so Mari sat, regarding with contempt the dirt which was slowly beginning to settle. Ralph had wandered over to the barn to give her privacy. But now that she was alone, she didn't know what to do. He really wasn't there. She had planned to say some kind of goodbye, but it didn't seem appropriate to do so now, and she couldn't understand why. Suddenly her thoughts were filled with young Pear. He had stood next to the grave, put in a few shovelfuls of dirt, but then after the prayer had bounded off to the end of the garden where some of the married grandchildren's homes were. Something was in his hands, but Mari hadn't thought at the time to look at what it was. Now she felt an urgent need to see what he was up to. She stood up from the chair, and Cephas came jogging over from the house. "Ready to get something to eat, Mugga? I can help you." She could always count on Cephas Brighter to look after her. She often thought it was no accident he was named for her father. He was taller than the original, but had the same gentle gray eyes that now watched her with great concern. "Actually, no. Cephas, did you see where your cousin went, young Pear?" He exhaled. "Oh, Mugga, he's not doing well at all. I saw him walk off. I know he went past Ralph's house, but I lost sight of him after that. I can go find him." She squeezed his arm. "I think I'll take a little walk and see if I can find him myself." "But you're supposed to go in and eat something." "I will. I'm not hungry yet. I'll just go down to the end of your garden and back. You go to the house and finish eating." He stepped uncertainly. Sure I can't go with you? Mari shook her head. Young Pear sat between the thick pine trees that created a little forest thicket. The younger children loved to play in there, but none of them would be bothering him today. He opened the book and skimmed the last few chapters again. The probation imposed on Colonel Shin for trying to kill Gadaman and taking the food to feed Edge. The meeting of the northern commanders worried about the buildup of garters in Moorland. The research into people missing from the world. The planning of the offensive at Moorland. The 200 Salemite men that no one knew were in the trees, waiting for the escaping garters. Colonel Shin breaking his probation after the explosions that burned Moorland. His saving of Captain Thorne, Major Jordan, and more than a dozen other soldiers. Their injuries, the pox outbreak, the land grab, the copy of Terrap's map made and sent out secretly by Colonel Shin, the excursion sent to Terrap's land, the administrator's presentation calling it poisonous and claiming that the creator was nothing more than an ordinary man, High General Shin. Mari Shin protesting the findings in public and trying to tell the village it was all a lie. There you are. For some reason I had a feeling I'd find you here, young Pear. He slammed the book shut and stared up through the branches to see his grandmother. She seemed so small and frail today. Hardly the fierce and determined woman he was just reading about, who tried to proclaim to the world that the administrators were liars. He couldn't picture her as that woman either. Maybe Kala had those details wrong as well. Mugga, what do you want? I want to know how you are, she said kindly. This has been such a strange few days. We haven't spoken for so long. She tried to push her way into the tight stand of trees, but thought twice about it. Instead, she knelt a little stiffly on the ground. So, she asked him through the branches. I'm fine, he said shortly. Mari sighed. How can you be, young Pear? I'm a complete mess. I know you must feel that way too. You and me, we always feel the same ways. All right, I'm not fine, he admitted. But I will be, he added in gentle defiance. Mari nodded slowly. I suppose we all will be in time. What are you reading? I just was... He realized it was useless to put it off, and he held up Kala's book. Mari smiled. I was wondering when you might be interested in that. Discover anything thought-provoking? Young Pear scoffed. Yeah, you could say that. Mari narrowed her eyes at him. Such as? He did a lot more than I realized. He wasn't just an old man, was he? Mari said. That was just a recent development, you know. He was one of the greatest men who ever served in the army. He could have been anything, done anything, but instead he chose to do the right things. Young Pear couldn't help but groan as he said, sure, Mugga. What do you mean by that tone? Sure, Mugga? That seems to be all I hear you say lately. Young Pear, where are you going? His head snapped up. What do you mean? I mean, you seem so distant, Mari said. You hardly give me more than a couple words of an answer, but we used to chat for hours about your plans. So, what do you have planned next? I really could use a diversion right now, you know? Something else to keep my mind off of everything else. Young Pear offered a half-hearted smile. Not entirely sure of my next plans right now. Still want to fly? Oh, most definitely. Working on new wing dimensions? You could say that. Young Pear, will you promise me that you'll come tell me before your next attempt? I know I'm not nearly as strong as your grandfather, so I won't be carrying you home, but I do want to watch you try. Young Pear sighed. Of course, I'll tell you before my next flight. Mari nodded. What else are you planning? About your future or your first career? Not long until you're 18, you know. Yes, I know. I'm not sure yet. Mari waited for something else from him. He watched for her response. An uneasy silence hung between them. That never happened before. "Anything else, Mugga?" young Pear finally said. "Come get something to eat with me." "I will later." "Promise me?" "Yes, I'll be home in a little bit." Mari smiled dimly. "I can still hide pie for you, you know. Most of the pieces I hid I never intended to give to Perrin." Something caught in her throat, and if it were possible, she appeared even more fragile. She was right about them always feeling the same ways. The idea that she'd never again hide his pie for young Pear stabbed him with unexpected grief. It was her tears that startled him. Although she was staring down at her hands as if to compose herself, there were too many tears to ignore. She was too much to ignore. Young Pear leaped to his feet, forced himself through the thicket of trees, and knelt to wrap his arms around her. She gasped in surprise, then collapsed like a wilted flower against him. "I'm so sorry, Mugga," young Pear whispered, trying to keep his own tears in check, but knowing he was failing. "I don't think I've told you that yet. You've been through so much. It's just not fair. I'm so sorry." Mari gripped his arm and kissed it. "Thank you, young Pear." "I want to fix it all, Mugga, somehow." "Young Pear, there's nothing that needs to be fixed, but healed. We're starting that right now." He kissed the top of her head and sat down next to her, keeping a supporting arm around her, but not yet meeting her eyes. He couldn't focus on anything just yet. "I can do much more than that, Mugga." "What do you mean?" she asked and sniffled. Young Pear sighed. "I don't know yet, but I promise when I figure it out, I'll tell you." "Young Pear, all I need you to do is hug me and talk to me. This right now is all that we need." She didn't understand. She didn't dare even try. But maybe it was because she was simply too sad right now to think of anything bigger. "Sure, Mugga." There's that answer again. She chanced to look up into his eyes, and he glanced over at her, sure that his eyes were as red and puffy as hers. He shrugged. "It's an easy answer." "Remember, there are no easy answers, only lazy ones." Young Pear rolled his eyes. "You just never quit, do you? Are you going to ask me the color of the sky now?" Mari glanced up. "Looks to be rather unsettled, don't you think? Sunny here, cloudy over there. A storm may be approaching. We should get in. Get something to eat," she hinted. Young Pear glanced down at the book he dropped on the ground when he wriggled his way out of the trees to his grandmother. He was nearly finished with it, but... "You're right, Mugga. Let's go eat." Everyone looked immensely relieved when Mari and young Pear came to the house. Pato and Jatesy exchanged looks that Mari couldn't interpret, and Cephas picked up a plate of food he must have set down moments before, probably on his way out to look for them. Pato came over and put an arm around young Pear. "Mrs. Ost brought over that spicy dish you like so much. I set aside part of it in the kitchen for you." "Thanks, Papa." Young Pear nodded to his father and walked into Jatesy's kitchen. Pato beamed at Mari as she sat down and took a plate of food Susie brought her. "How'd you do it, Mother? How'd you get him in?" "I'm not really sure, Pato. I think I just got the timing right. I also think his stomach was more persuasive than anything I said. I'm sure I heard it growling." Pato smiled sadly. "We still have a way to go with him, don't we?" Mari nodded and noticed the potatoes on her plate. For some reason, at every burial, this shredded potato dish showed up. If it was some odd Salem tradition or not, she wasn't sure, but they always tasted like death to her. Especially this batch. Someone made them with onions. Perrin hated onions and potatoes. And then it hit her again. She didn't have to warn him about them. Didn't need to steer him to get a large spoonful from another dish. She watched her family as they finished eating, as the little ones laughed and played, forgetting what happened that day, as the teenagers talked quietly with each other and occasionally chuckled, as her son and daughter spoke with and smiled at their spouses. She ate the potatoes that tasted like ash. Jatesy couldn't bear to watch her mother anymore, looking so frail, pale, and picking helplessly at her plate of food. It was almost as if Mari was trying to die too, and Jatesy understood her desire. So what she should say to her, she wasn't sure. Her attention was drawn to 2-year-old Fennec Zenas, who was sitting on the floor and picking berries out of his pie. Jatesy winced. He'd be wiping his sticky fingers on his tunic at any moment, and Salima would be waddling over with a damp cloth just a moment too late. Fennec's head popped up, as if he heard something, and Jatesy strained to listen to what caught his attention. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Mari watching him too, having given up on her meal. Jatesy had started for Fennec, intent on cleaning his fingers before Salima noticed his mess, when Fennec jumped to his feet. This time Jatesy heard it too. Thunder. "Pugga!" Fennec cried and ran for the front door. Jatesy's heart sank, and several people around Fennec stared at him, Mari included. Jatesy would try to fix that later, but in the meantime she ran after her grandson, who had headed out the door to the front porch. "Pugga, I hear you!" he cried to the approaching storm clouds. No, Fennec, oh, sweetie, it's not Pugga." Jatesy scooped him up and held him close. Tears fell as she looked at his happy little face. "Sweetie, it's just a storm. It's not... He can't..." But Fennec was watching the clouds rolling in with great anticipation. Jates. He thought my singing, yes, I confess, I did sing with them. He thought my singing sounded like thunder. Jatesy gasped as the words filled her. Another rumble reached them, and Fennec waved happily. "If he needs to hear me in the thunder, then I can be in the thunder. Wherever he needs me to be, just let him be." "Then can I have you anywhere as well?" Jatesy thought back. "Of course, but I think you'd rather I be right here." The feeling was unmistakable. She'd experienced it many times before, her father's arms wrapped around her from behind in a great big hug. She could even smell him, earthy sweet, as if the coming rain carried his scent with the wind. "Pugga," Fennec whispered to his grandmother. Jatesy nodded. "I feel him too, sweetie." She sighed in the feeling of comfort that nearly overwhelmed her. Joy, pure joy. "Can everyone feel you, Father?" she whispered. "I'm trying to reach everyone. Some don't believe it's me they feel. They're not expecting it. It took me a while to reach Deck this morning. He couldn't understand why he kept thinking about me while he was pushing on the rump of that big bull to get him out to pasture. I kept telling him to get his hands off my steak. Suddenly he heard me. I'd never seen him jump so quick. That got the bull out, though." Jatesy couldn't help it. She laughed. The thunder laughed back. "I miss you. Oh, I miss you so much. I don't know how it'll ever stop hurting," Jatesy murmured as her face became wet with tears and now raindrops. "It will, my darling daughter. Remember, this is only temporary." "Take care of yourself." "I don't need to. I'm perfectly fine. My calling now is to take care of all of you." Mari fell asleep that night on the sofa in her small gathering room. For some reason, that was where his scent, slowly fading, was still the strongest. Young Pear stayed up late reading the last few pages of the book. The confrontation at the Shin's house, the resignation, Uncle Shem's spying on General Cain Thorne in Idamia, Idamia's decision to try the Shins as traitors, their escape with the help of the Hafadis, Captain Thorne's failed pursuit, and the murder of Dorman. Their arrival in Salem, the end. He didn't like the end. It seemed almost cowardly somehow. Exactly who was the coward, he wasn't sure, nor did he want to decide that. But there were a few things he was sure about. In the past, whenever Perrin saw a problem, he confronted it. He defied those in authority again and again. He made plans without consulting those above him. He escaped the artificial and illogical boundaries they imposed, and he was wildly successful. He changed their world. If one Perrin could do it, so could another. That would be the legacy. No, 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 young pair, you're reading it all wrong. Young pair, are you listening? Young pair! No one was surprised when, the next morning after the burial, Clark didn't move at all. He hadn't been up in 2 days. Canthe, Tabit, and Deck had tried half-heartedly a few times to tempt him with something, but his eyes had gone glassy, and he wouldn't acknowledge them, even as they gently splashed water on his lips. Canthe and Tabit and many other grandchildren patted his still form one last time, sobbing as they said goodbye to the horse who had always been an extension of their pugga. One more painful loss. Mari came to the fence and sighed as she looked at the massive, lifeless animal. Of course he'd get to go on, was all she said after a while. As much as she hated horses, she tolerated Clark. Everyone who had gathered around the pasture was surprised next to see her dip under the fence, walk over to his body, and pat him on his bowed back. Take care of Perrin, all right, she said. You and the cat and Barker, the barkless dog. Interesting how all of you were dark, shadowy animals. He always loved black creatures. I suppose you can follow him anywhere and no one will notice. Thank you for bringing me to Salem, and for the many rides to the temple ruins and back. You, Clark, were a decent horse that I really didn't mind riding. The butchers were considerate enough to heft Clark onto a wagon with their pulley system and haul him away before they did their work, so that none of the families would have to witness the old horse becoming food for the sheepdogs. Pato and Deck were the last to leave the road as the wagon trundled down it. Neither of the men said a word, but watched with tears slipping down their faces. Eventually they walked back to their houses, arm in arm. There were chores to do. It was 3 days later, after midday meal, when Sam and Con Cadby stepped out of their houses to walk together to the weaving barn. Since the two Cadby families returned from the States on the far west of Salem, they'd been trying to get back into a normal routine. Con had gathered the young husbands together the night of the burial and told them of his conversation with Perrin on the trail, his apology, and his praise of all of them. Lek also told them about his last conversation with Perrin and his apology for his threats. The result was teary-eyed young men, and a Wes who was more confused than ever before. Sam and Con had comforted their weeping wives during the 8-mile wagon ride home. Lori and Jory didn't want to leave their parents and grandmother the day after the burial, but Mugga insisted it was time for them to get back to their sheep, and their little ones needed their own beds. There was nothing more to do, except visit when they could. The two fathers made their way through the garden where cousins Ensio and Corey were playing with their toddler sisters Gersh and Anley. They patted the children's heads as they usually did, but paused outside the garden gate because something seemed odd about their play. Lori came from the hen house with a basket of eggs and saw her husband and brother-in-law watching the children. Sam waved his wife over. "Listen to them," he whispered. She stopped at the low fence by the men and watched the 4 little children. What they were doing wasn't so unusual. They had dug a little trench and filled it with pebbles. Then Ensio took a mug of water and poured it down the trench, while Corey and the girls tossed sticks into it to watch them float away. Lori looked at the men. "They do this all the time," she whispered back. "No, listen." "Over here, Captain! The storm's coming," Ensio called. "All right, Colonel," answered Corey. Lori's mouth dropped open in surprise. Her sister, seeing them from the window, came out to them. "What is it?" Jory asked as she reached them. The three of them gestured to the children. 2-year-old Gersh dropped bits of moss onto the rocks. "That help, Colonel?" Jory looked in alarm at her sister. "Colonel?" she mouthed. Lori nodded. Enzio filled the mug again with water from a nearby bucket. "Deluge is coming, men! Prepare the dikes!" The 3 younger children stopped and stared at him. Enzio seemed confused himself. Con cleared his throat. Perrin?" he ventured. "They don't know what deluge means." Enzio's face brightened. "Lots of water coming, men! Walls might break. Here it comes!" And Enzio poured the mug of water down the trench. The children squealed and laughed, and the bits of moss washed away. "Again! Again!" Annalie cried. "Whatever you say, Tenant," Enzio said cheerfully. "Pugga says we need more rocks. The trench should be longer so the sticks and moss float farther." "More rocks!" Gersh cried, and went to pick up pebbles. Jory, her hand in front of her mouth, murmured, "Enzio said Pugga, didn't he?" "Remember when we played flood with him?" Lori whispered. "He'd even get out the pickaxe and dig a proper trench. We used buckets of water." "And Selima would lecture us on getting dirty," Jory replied. "But Cambo would throw rocks to splash her on purpose. He knew to throw the rocks when Pugga yelled, 'Deluge coming, men!'" Enzio called again, pouring more water that splashed Corey unexpectedly. "Hey!" Corey cried out. "Mama, did you see that? Pugga didn't wait for me to move." Jory sniffled. "I did, Corey. That's just the way he plays." She looked at her sister for confirmation. Lori nodded at her nephew. Corey scowled, then ran to get more bits of moss. Sniffling in miserable happiness, Jory said, "I got promoted all the way to lieutenant colonel before I decided I was getting too old to play that. I think I was 11. Lori smiled faintly. "I only made it to major before I started listening to Selima. Pugga always called her the administrator when she left a tell on us for getting dirty." Jory snorted at the memory, and Lori laughed softly. Lori cleared her throat. "Pugga," she said quietly, "will you let us know if anyone gets in trouble?" "Are dirty clothes considered getting in trouble?" The sisters stared at each other, trying to read on each other's face to see if the other had heard the words as well. Jory said, No, Pugga. That's only at Selima's house. Her boys are the ones who can't get dirty." "That will change. This next son that's coming, he's one messy boy." Lori grinned at Jory. "Next son." Jory grinned back. "Messy boy." Their husbands chuckled. "Poor Lek," said Sam. "Poor Calla. She so much wants another granddaughter, but that one's coming as well. Go back to work. I've got things under control here. And by the way, sumpin' is what Corey says when he doesn't know the name of something. Sumpin' then can mean anything and everything. That doesn't help a whole lot, does it?" "Thank you, Pugga," Jory said, looking around, not sure where to direct her words. Lori, Con, and Sam nodded. "Longer, men! Make the trench longer!" "I think you meant for that to be a C, not an O. You best stop chiseling." Ralph stopped and looked at the stone in the twilight. "Oh, yes, you're right. I think I'm getting a little tired." "Go home for the evening. Give that wife of yours a few moments of quiet. Grunnick's been a bit difficult today. This boulder's not going anywhere." "I suppose that's true. Thanks, Pugga." "Did you check up on the hillside?" "The hillside?" 12-year-old Banu Brighter thought to herself. Her 8-year-old sister Yonali sighed and looked around. "She's not here, Banu. She's gone." "No, she's not. I know she's here somewhere. She never goes this far. Go check on the hillside. Maybe we should check the hillside, Yanali suggested. Why are you saying that? Banu snapped, and immediately felt guilty for it. Because it seems like the right place to check, Yanali insisted. She's right, Banu. Go check the hillside. It's getting dark, and your mother will start to get worried. Banu sighed. All right. She hesitated to say the name. Paga told you to check the hillside, didn't he? Yanali smiled. Banu didn't respond, but rushed up the hillside behind the herd, her sister in tow. There they saw the goat, chewing on the rope she bit through to escape in the first place. You are the dumbest goat in the world, Banu yelled in relief as she walked up to it and took it by the collar. Now, Banu, who's the one who tied her up and forgot about her for the entire day? By the way, you're welcome. I know your cousin jumped off the schoolhouse, but why does that mean you should jump off the shed roof? Atlee Brighter, holding the blanket he hoped would catch the wind and ease him slowly to the ground, looked around. He was alone, but he felt the words distinctly. You're only 10. I thought you wanted to see 11. Do you have any idea what a broken leg feels like? Remember how much pain young Pear was in last year when he broke his arm again? That's what you'll be feeling the moment you hit the ground, but it will be your leg. Don't do this, Atlee. Just turn around and go back down that ladder. Right now. I'm watching you. Now, Atlee. That's right. Step back. Watch your footing there. Don't kick the ladder. Boy, that was close. Put the blanket down first. No, not on top of the shed. Throw it on the ground. That's right. Now, climb down the ladder and put it away when you're done. Don't want young Shem following you. Atlee, I said to put away the ladder. Atlee, get back here. Salima, you're too far along to be doing that. Isn't that why your sister-in-law is here? Salima, kneeling in the middle of her garden, sat up on her knees. The humidity of the weeding day steamed over her, making her feel hotter than she already was. She pushed away a sweaty lock of dark curly hair and glanced at Lek's youngest sister, Hulda. The 14-year-old weeding next to her was watching her. You hate kneeling in the dirt, and you know it. Hulda's eyes grew big. You hate kneeling in the dirt. I never understood why my mother enjoyed this, Salima admitted quietly. You might want to go check the bread. You've lost track of time. Hulda knows what to do here. Salima stood up. I should check on the bread. Do you mind? Hulda shook her head. I know what to do. Don't pull the carrots. Salima and Hulda scanned the area as if expecting someone else to be there before Salima started for the house. By the way, Salima, prepare for another son. The third one's usually the hardest, I've been told, but if anyone can handle him, you can. She stopped in her tracks as she reached the back door. What did you say? She whispered. You better check the bread before it overbakes. Slowly, Salima opened the door and walked into the kitchen. That's not what I meant. Paga? Yes, and I know what you meant. And I'm right about the bread, aren't I? Salima pulled out the loaves just in time, her eyes growing moist. Another boy. Oh, Paga, another boy. I had 5 younger brothers before I finally got a little sister. I was really hoping for... She sat down hard on a chair and stroked her large belly. He's adorable, Salima. He'll melt your heart, even as he dirties your floors. You really want to tell this little boy that you'd rather he not come? No, she said loudly, and gripped her belly tighter. No, of course not. That's what I thought. I also thought you'd appreciate a little warning. Salima began to cry. No, Salima, don't do that. I know you're expecting and everything, but That's why I get to do this, Pugga." She laughed in her sobs. "And you're right, I do appreciate the warning. I never told you this, but I'm sorry about the name, Pugga. If only I could have said my R's better when I was a toddler." "Not at all. Best name in the world." "Grab that piece of paper." Zadok had gone into Shem's office to retrieve a file his father had forgotten to take to the council meeting, but he found himself staring at the desk. "The one on the end, it's upside down. That's why Shem didn't recognize it. Now, get it to your mother. She was going to bring him dinner at the main storehouse before the meeting. One of the assistants will need that sooner than Shem realizes. He can't wait until tomorrow like he thinks he can." Zadok picked up the file, looked around the office, nodded once in gratitude to it, and slipped out the door. "Lilla smells wonderful as usual. Be ready for Pato tonight. Shem and the council are going to give him my position, but he doesn't feel ready for it. I can't imagine anyone who could do a better job. You're going to have to help him realize that. He practically did my job for me. By the way, your father and I have had some wonderful conversations. He's still watching you." "Mari, I've reached almost all of them." It was late at night, and Mari was sitting up in bed, reading. She used to do it all the time when she was single, but quit after she and Perrin were married because he didn't like the candlelight when he tried to sleep. When she picked up her old habit again a few days after he passed, she felt guilty about it. But then she remembered what Kala told her. It's all right to start living how you need to live. Mari sat down the book. "I know," she whispered. "I've been receiving reports the last few weeks. It's been wonderful to hear how you've gotten around. I went to Selima's house today and found her and Kala crying at the kitchen table. You want to know what they told me?" Mari thought she heard a chuckle. "You were there earlier, and Selima's going to have another son. She thinks they should name him Perrin Zenas." "How many Perrins do there need to be in Salem?" Mari grinned. "So far, there are 4 new baby boys named Perrin. Kala told me yesterday that one of Shem's assistants has started making a list to see how often you're honored. And wait till you hear this. There's even a baby girl that was named Perinia." "Oh, that's just tragic. What were her parents thinking?" Mari laughed softly. "I thought Pato and Lilla naming their first daughter Lorexania was cruel, but at least they could shorten it to Lori. I suppose the family could call their daughter Perry." "Perhaps. I'm not even there to apologize to the poor girl when she's older. Will you do it if you ever run into her?" "Of course. You said you've reached almost everyone?" "Except one. Want to guess who?" "I know, Perrin. He promised he'd tell me what he's up to, but he hasn't said more than half a dozen words to me since we spoke after the burial." "It's not good, Mari. I follow him around all day when he's haying, but he's not listening, not one bit. I can't force him to hear me. It has to be his choice. But he's nearly past feeling. He's too busy planning." "What is he planning to do?" "I can't bear to tell you." "He wants to go to Edge, or somewhere else in the world, doesn't he? Just to get away for a time?" "How did you know?" "He's you at that age." "I know. That's my biggest worry." And that's also the end of the chapter. Thank you.